What is the nature of a god? And the answer that we get typically from believers is definition in the form of the following properties: omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, and omnibenevolence. But each property given is either a misnomer or a blunder, for the classical god of monotheism is not actually considered all-powerful, because the operative word all is a set that contains both the logically possible and the logically impossible. If you don't understand why this is a problem, consider the question: can an omnipotent God do X, where X represents a logical paradox? For example, can an immortal God commit suicide? Can an omnipotent God create a square circle? That would be logically impossible. It simply follows from definitions and from properties given that it can't be done. Most philosophers consider logical paradoxes to be metaphysically impossible to actualize. So the definition of the word omnipotent has had to change in response to philosophical criticism. Omniscience is also subject to objections. Consider the question: can an all-knowing God do X, where X represents what is logically impossible to know? For instance, the monotheistic God is defined as having no beginning. So God couldn't know what it would be like for God to have a beginning. God's nature is unaccounted for in this hypothesis. So God couldn't know why its nature is the way it is. God didn't create its own nature, it just is, and God doesn't have a choice about it. There's no reason behind God's nature. So the origin of God's nature would be a great mystery to such a God. Therefore, the set of all things an all-knowing God could know is limited to what's logically and metaphysically possible to know. It's a set that is less than the set of all things. At this point in the definition, we have a hypothetical God both limited in power and knowledge by necessity, by logical necessity. Any hypothetical God would have to be limited in power to even be coherent. Additional properties are added to this hypothesis, and they multiply the problems. They present more opportunities for internal conflicts within the definition itself. Consider the question: can a coherent God have mutually exclusive properties? Well, if the answer is yes, then the argument itself is incoherent. For example, consider being both all-merciful and all-just. For to forgive any sin would be merciful but not just, and to punish all sin would be just but not merciful. Consider the question: can a perfect God make mistakes? Well, by definition, the answer must be no. Being perfect entails flawlessness. A perfect God would be one unable to fail at any task. Any task would be accomplished perfectly in the most efficient, elegant, and intelligent manner possible. To do otherwise would be imperfect and, by definition, logically incoherent. This is the linchpin of the classic monotheistic argument. If your hypothesis entails a perfect God, that God cannot make mistakes. I mean, you're talking about something that would be intellectually perfect, something that would carry out any task perfectly. I mean, you're talking about something with unlimited power. I mean, there's simply no way that such a being could fail at any task. Now, if your hypothesis entails that that God then wrote a book or decided that a book should be made to reflect its nature, what your definition entails is that the book must be perfect, or at least the best book that could possibly be made. If it is not perfect, then the entire hypothesis is incoherent. I mean, this is the classic atheological argument against religion. Religion X claims to be the work of a perfect mind. Religion X is not perfect. Therefore, Religion X is not the product of a perfect mind. They're claiming that their religion is the work of the most intelligent being possible, that can't fail at any task, that is the most powerful being imaginable, that if it wanted to make a perfect book, it would. They're claiming it wanted to make a perfect book, and so they have to claim, to be consistent, that the book is perfect. And when imperfections, when mistakes are pointed out, believers either make excuses for why their religious arguments are logically incoherent, or they give up and appeal to some mystery we can never understand. But the God hypothesis doesn't leave room for such mystery. A detailed definition has been offered, and that definition has been revised repeatedly. There are clear implications given the properties assigned to this God hypothesis. It implies that if God wanted to send us a message, that God would have the power and will to make that message perfect. It would be elegant. It would be superior to anything a limited human could conceive. And yet, this is laughably not the case. Moderate and liberal theists may simply abandon the concept of biblical inerrancy, but this causes a conflict with the hypothesis that there is a personal God who wanted the world to know his perfect message, because it's an admission that there is no perfect message to offer as evidence for this God. We all have the right to believe whatever we believe, for whatever reason we want. But the problem is when religious fundamentalists want to change society around them based on their irrational beliefs. This is why so many former believers turned atheists are vocal. Let me leave you with an atheological syllogism. 1. If a supreme personal creator deity existed, such a God would have both the will and the power to do perfect work. This just follows from definitions. It just follows from logical implications. 2. If this hypothetical God wanted the world to know he existed, said God would accomplish this task perfectly, elegantly, in the most direct and intelligent and efficient way possible. It's not hard to understand what the concept of doing the best job that you could possibly do. 3. If such a God could arrange events so that there was a perfect message, there would be. This message would be the most perfect book that was logically possible to write. If a given religion contains one or more logical contradictions, then the God hypothesis of that religion can be considered falsified, or the God in question is simply incoherent. 4. Honest Christians and skeptics have shown that there are contradictions and inconsistencies within the Quran. Note that liberal and moderate Muslims have admitted this is the case. 5. The same goes for the Bible. Honest Muslims and secular skeptics have shown that there are contradictions within the Bible. And there are Christians who have admitted that this is the case, mainly non-biblical literalists. 6. Christianity and Islam can either be considered falsified or God is incoherent. If God is incoherent, then the entire hypothesis given, all the definitions given, simply fall away, and you have nothing left but dust and tears and broken dreams.